Hi, everyone. I'm Lauren Conlin from Pop Crime TV, and I am here to give you all a Diddy Daily Digest of everything that's going on in the federal trial of the U.S. versus Sean Combs. As you all know, it's not televised, but I have been in the courtroom every single day, and we are now on week 3. So Cassie Ventura took the stand. She was third to take the stand, 8.5 months pregnant, very composed, very poised. Ventura laid the foundation of her being groomed by Diddy from a very young age. She signed with Bad Boy when she was 22 or 21, and they got together shortly after that. We heard from Cassie what freak offs were and what freak offs entailed. And generally, freak offs would last between 1 and 4 days. Part of these FOs was doing a lot of excessive drugs so she could get through it. These freak offs always involved an escort or a third party of some kind. And we actually we heard from 2 escorts. Cassie testified about this, and she corroborated the baby oil use. At one point, the government asked Cassie what brand of baby oil it was, how many bottles were used during the freak offs. And she said 10, by the way. And they said, well, how big were these bottles? And she said, they're about this big. I mean, they're going on and on and on. She even said at one point she was forced to get into an inflatable pool, like a kiddie pool, filled with baby oil by Diddy's directive. They're doing this because they're corroborating that Diddy is a fan of baby oil, and they are trying to link this baby oil to his alleged sex crimes. Cassie testified about this. She testified that he always carried this Louis Vuitton, quote, med bag, which other people have also corroborated that he carried this. And a lot of his drugs were in this bag, his prescription drugs, his MDMA, ecstasy, ketamine, etc. And Cassie, as well as other assistants, testified that Diddy would have other people get him these drugs in their names because he could only get a certain amount of these prescriptions, and he was addicted to opioids. She said that in 2012, after a Playboy Mansion party, he actually overdosed. She also said that he never went to rehab, but he went to somewhere in Arizona called Sedona. It turns out he had sent Cassie a video of himself in Sedona praising God, saying everything was great. I believe it was either a few days or a week after the Intercontinental beatdown in 2016. That was March of 2016. I would say, all of her testimony was important, but certain things that really stuck out was Kid Cudi. And we've heard a couple different versions of what happened with Kid Cudi. She testified that when Diddy found out about Kid Cudi, he freaked out, and Diddy and Cassie were on again, off again, per Cassie. And at this point, she was in a relationship with Kid Cudi for about a year. But again, she would still do these FOs with Diddy because I believe she was groomed by him and kind of under his thumb at this point. She testified that he blew up Kid Cudi's car and he threatened them. He threatened to hurt them, and he actually did. He kicked Cassie over and over, leaving marks all over her. And this was right before Christmas. This was December of 2011. Cassie emailed her mother with the subject line threats, and she CC'd Diddy's assistant. Her name is Capricorn Clark. Cassie CC'd Capricorn, sent this email to them, and she said that Diddy threatened to harm her and Scott Mescudi, Kid Cudi, but he wouldn't do it by his hands. He'd be out of the country when this happens, and it would be done by somebody else. And then he also threatened to release, quote, 2 sex tapes. We later heard from Cassie's mother, Regina Ventura, that she later heard from Diddy or an executive at Bad Boy demanding $20,000 to not release the sex tapes. And so she and her husband, Cassie's dad, and they come from humble beginnings, so they had to take out a second mortgage for this. Regina stated that the money was actually returned a few days later, this $20,000, but I thought that was just a really important detail. We also heard some things from Cassie during the cross-examination, or we saw some things as well, just emails where she would write Diddy that she loved the FOs, and it appeared that he was giving her an out at one point, like, you don't have to do anymore. And she was like, no, I want to do them. I don't want this to be the last FO. I want it to be, the first of the rest of my life. Or, and again, I'm paraphrasing. That's not exactly what she said, but it was something along those lines. It's very hard in the moment. We are taking notes. There are no phones in federal court, no computers. So these exhibits are shown on the screen very briefly. And then the reporters were expected to write all this down or get as much as we can from it until the exhibits or the evidence is later released to the public. So that's why I'm paraphrasing for some of this. There was a lot of back and forth during Cassie's cross about some of the messages she sent him. And they really seemed to focus on jealousy, saying that Cassie was jealous of Kim Porter and jealous of all of Diddy's girlfriends that he had, because he did have a lot at the time. That was Cassie's testimony. But we've heard from the security guard at the Intercontinental who broke up the physical altercation between Cassie and Diddy. I mean, it was technically already done when he got up there. We've heard from two escorts. One, Daniel Phillip, who I mentioned was a manager of a female strip club, whatever you want to call it. And then we heard from an escort named The Punisher, who was a stripper. And he actually wrote a book. It was a funny moment on the stand. He wrote this book called In Search of Freezer Meat because he dealt with erectile dysfunction. Freezer meat, like hard meat, I guess. But it was a moment where everybody laughed in the courtroom because Diddy's attorney, his name is Xavier Donaldson, he just kind of made light of the whole thing. But both of these escorts, they had corroborating stories where they would get a call from Cassie saying, can you come entertain for my bachelorette party? They would show up at a hotel, and all the hotels seemed to kind of match up, like Diddy's favorite hotel in these different cities. He loved the Trump International in New York. He loved the Intercontinental in LA. So they would show up and Cassie would answer the door and be like, oh, sorry, it's just me and my husband. Is that okay? She would say, my husband wanted to do something special for me. Is that cool with you? And then they would rub baby oil on each other and things would escalate. And both escorts said that Diddy would kind of direct Cassie during these FOs. The Punisher, he said that Cassie would sigh a little bit, but then he also testified during cross that she appeared to be enjoying herself some of the time. The first escort that we heard from, Daniel Phillip, he actually said that he also experienced erectile dysfunction, but because he witnessed Diddy abuse Cassie. And there was a couple different instances where he witnessed this, and he was very disturbed by it. He appeared to really care for Cassie. He witnessed a time where Diddy threw a liquor bottle at the wall and almost hit her, and then said that Cassie, he heard her screaming in the other room after Diddy dragged her by the hair from her computer chair, actually, into her bedroom because he said, hey, come here. And she said, give me a second. We've heard from two HSI special agents, actually three, I'm sorry. So we first heard from a special agent who did the raid in New York City at the Park Hyatt in September of 2024. And when I say raid, I really mean arrest. They obviously raided his hotel room at the Park Hyatt, and he was arrested. Now, I think a lot of us were not expecting to hear that she found any evidence or anything crazy that was collected in the hotel room in September, because I remember during the pretrial hearings, Diddy's lawyers had, tried to get him out on bail. And they said, he flew to New York expecting to be arrested. So he's cooperating. He was coming here in anticipation of his arrest. Well, when this special agent got on the stand, her name was Special Agent Yasin Binda, she tells us that she found bottles of baby oil in the bathtub, bottles of Astroglide in his Louis Vuitton med bag that we heard about. She found MDMA and ketamine, and then $9,000 in cash. I mean, that sounds like an FO that we've heard corroborated by now. So that was interesting. The other HSI agent we heard from, his name was Agent Gerard Gannon, and he was in charge of the March 2024 raid on Diddy's Star Island, Miami property. So that was some interesting testimony. They found lots of very high stripper heels, 12 to 13 pairs during this raid. They found two AR-15s that were defaced, and they were taken apart. The upper barrel and the lower barrel, they were separated. And the defense really seemed to kind of hone in on that. So when Special Agent Gannon showed the jury the gun or the AR-15s, they were together. And the defense was like, but, when you found them, they weren't together. they were actually in different areas. One barrel was actually wrapped in a towel, the other one was in a different closet. And then we saw different drugs and lots of baby oil. Again, lots and lots of it, like a crate of it. I think there was 30 bottles in one bathroom, 25 bottles of Astroglide. But the drugs that we saw, different pills, MDMA, ecstasy, there were ecstasy pills with the Tesla label on it. And most of this was found in a random Gucci bag that was sitting on a dresser. But the defense made sure to point out, well, in the indictment, you can see all of these drugs. They were, most of them, there was such a little amount that they were destroyed. So they wanted to show us that not enough drugs to, for really anything but to destroy them. So then we heard from a third HSI agent who worked in the forensics department who extracted the data from Cassie's 3 MacBook devices. They were 3 computers. And we've seen a lot of text messages, very old text messages, very old emails. And they wanted to make it clear that this is how they were able to get them and why sometimes they would show, double messages or something would be blank. And he basically said, that's just what happens with these really old devices. However, we can match it up with the raw data very easily. He also made sure to tell us that they didn't need a search warrant for these because Cassie gave consent. But on one of the computers, there was 2 logins. There was a guest login and there was a Frank Black login, which is one of Diddy's aliases. They didn't go into the Frank Black alias until they got a search warrant. Dr. Dawn Hughes testified to the grooming, why abuse survivors and victims go back to their abuser, how they placate them. She talked a lot about trauma bonding, all these things that Cassie Ventura had endured. There was lots of objections and lots of sidebars during Dr. Dawn Hughes' testimony. And many of you will recall that she testified in the Amber Heard Johnny Depp trial as well. Let's get to Kid Cudi, because I'm not trying to make this video super long, even though it's turning out to be long. I promise you every day it'll be much more condensed. I'm just trying to catch everybody up at this point. So Kid Cudi testified, and he talked about what happened between he and Cassie, how essentially I think they were introduced by Diddy. It was a little bit unclear. I think they knew each other just from, the music industry, but Diddy put them together to work together on a song. And this was brought up a lot, by the way, because the government wanted to say that Diddy controlled Cassie's career. He controlled her looks. He controlled the way she acted, everything about her. Kid Cudi, they worked on a song, and he said they had a relationship for a year. And by the way, just to make sure I always counter with what the defense's argument was about Diddy controlling Cassie, it's been said multiple times at this point that Cassie got a lot more attention than other bad boy artists, and that Diddy did do a lot for her career-wise in terms of putting her together with certain artists, and he was there for her during her bad performances and et cetera, et cetera. Basically, she has a burner phone to communicate with Kid Cudi. Diddy accidentally sees basically a message that she sent an assistant about Kid Cudi, and he freaked out. And Kid Cudi describes getting a call from Capricorn Clark, Diddy's assistant and Cassie's also brand manager, because Diddy kidnapped her in December of 2011 when he found out that Cassie was dating Cudi, and made her go with him and his bodyguard Ruben to Kid Cudi's house. And Kid Cudi said, he broke into my house. Capricorn Clark calls us from the driveway, and, I rush over there. Kid Cudi claimed that when he got there, nobody was there, but he called the police. He said that his dog was locked in a bathroom and his dog had PTSD from this. And he also said that nothing was stolen, but there's presents unwrapped that he got his family from Chanel on the kitchen table. He testified that Diddy was calling him after saying, I just want to talk, I want to talk, and he was ignoring him. And then he went to Connecticut with Cassie for Christmas, ignored all of Diddy's calls and texts, whatever. And he said that Cassie broke up with him after that because she was scared. She's like, I just think it's smart if we break up. And she didn't tell anyone, but she flew to Arizona to meet Diddy. And Kid Cudi goes back to LA. And he said in January of 2012, like a month after the break-in, his dog sitter calls him at 6:30 a.m. He's not home. He said he was at his ex-girlfriend's sister's house. And she said, your car is on fire. And he's like, what? And she took pictures, and he races home, and a Molotov cocktail had been thrown in his car, in the top of his car. That's when he decided to call Diddy and be like, okay, let's talk. So they meet at the Soho House, excuse me, in LA. And he actually described Diddy as standing in this room. And he said he was looking like a Marvel supervillain. That elicited some laughs from the courtroom, not from Diddy. He said that the defense elicited from Kid Cudi that he felt like he was played by Cassie. And he said, or I think it was Agnifilo that did the cross. And he said, do you feel like both of you were played, you and Mr. Combs? And he said, yes. I was like, whoa. I guess at the end of this meeting, they shook hands, and Kid Cudi said, well, what about my car? And Diddy's like, I don't know what you're talking about. So yeah, that's that. Really quickly, Dawn Richard, she's from Danity Kane, the girl group making the band. And she also is from Diddy Dirty Money, another group that he formed in 2009. She testified that the biggest thing for her was the skillet incident that she witnessed, where she said Diddy almost beat Cassie with a skillet for not making his eggs fast enough. And he had her on the floor, and he was dragging her, beating her, dragged her up the stairs. And the next day, she said that Diddy threatened her and Kalina Harper, her bandmate, by saying, what you saw was passion. You can't tell anyone, because if you tell, where I'm from, people disappear or people go missing. And that to her was a death threat. She was very scared, she said. And when the defense came up, they basically said that she had met with the government about 7 or 8 times, and she never said that about the alleged death threat until their last meeting. So they were like, so you got threatened, your life was threatened, and you never said this ever. And she was like, yeah, my memory changed. She actually said that. She said that she worked hard to forget the memories, but then during the government redirect, she actually said, or they got it out of her. And to me, it made sense. She just said that, she was going through PTSD and she was trying to suppress everything. And now, after the civil suit by Cassie, then she filed her own, she was working through all of the trauma, and she was able to recover some of these memories. But again, she admitted, yes, my memory has changed and I have said different things. That was, I guess, a shot to her credibility. However, she said without a doubt she witnessed Cassie get beat, and she felt threatened by Diddy. And then after that, the defense said, okay, well, you also texted him first after you stopped working with him in 2011. You tried to work with him again. Is that true? And she said yes. There's a lot of this, by the way, a lot of like, Diddy did this to me, he beat me, and then people go back and want to work with him again, or they end up apologizing. And there are experts that will talk about this, and like I said, Dr. Don Hughes has talked about this some as well. Let's get to what happened today, day 10, because we heard, you know what, before I get just kidding. There were 2 other assistants we heard from, David James, one assistant, and a man named George Kaplan. Both assistants, both kind of testified, along the same lines of setting up hotel rooms, baby oil, having to clean it up, stains everywhere. We heard about just some incidents where Diddy wasn't exactly the nicest boss. He got in their faces and he yelled at them. We also heard about an incident from David James where they went after Suge Knight after they saw him at Mel's Diner. Suge was gone by the time they got there. Basically, a bodyguard said that he saw one of Suge's guys hand Suge a gun, and they ran to Diddy back at home to tell him. And they went back to Mel's Diner. He wasn't there. This is David James, the bodyguard, and Diddy. And so that, again, it was that testimony I thought was interesting because Cassie told us this story as well, but she didn't mention David James's name. But we just heard a lot more detail from David James. And what I thought was interesting about David, as well as George Kaplan, this other assistant, they both seem to respect Diddy, or say that they respected him from like a business standpoint, and gave him a head nod when they walked off the stand. And a couple times they were laughing with Diddy. Like, Diddy was in his seat laughing. And he's been really stoic for a lot of this testimony, because a lot of it is like, hey, he beat the crap out of me. Hey, I saw him assault this person. So he's just kind of standing there. Sitting there. He was very relaxed, very, very relaxed here with these two assistants. And yeah, both of them, David James said he didn't witness any physical abuse of Cassie. He heard some verbal things, I guess. And then George Kaplan said he heard something on a private jet, and he didn't see it, but he heard it. And then he was told to go get some anti-inflammatory medication for Cassie's eye because he saw her eye was all messed up. And he actually quit shortly after that. So yes, those were those two assistants. Okay. Now I'm really getting to Capricorn Clark. Sorry. It's been a while. And like, if you can see my notes, I wrote everything down, but sometimes I get on a roll. So excuse me. Okay. So let's go to Capricorn Clark today. She was Diddy's assistant from 2004 to 2006. And I want to make sure that this is not super confusing because she started working for him in 2004. Her official employment ended in 2018, but she left a few times in between. So I'll go through that. Capricorn Clark started off as an assistant in 2004, and then she became a Sean John brand manager. And then after that, she became a Sean Combs global brand manager, where she was in charge of his name and his likeness. And then she also was in charge of, as I mentioned, Cassie's brand and image. Now, she moved to New York, she said, in 2001. Both of her parents died when she was in high school. And she met Diddy actually through a friend, and she called him Puff, her friend Jeanette. They actually used to party together. And they were all really friendly. I mean, we saw emails later in the day where they called themselves, like, I think it was like JCS or something, like Jeanette, Sean, Capricorn, because they had this little group where they were all hanging out. She testified that the first night or the first day that she was employed, she said that Diddy and a bodyguard took her to Central Park after 9 at night, and he made a threat to her. Now, she testified that one of her best friends has kids with Suge Knight. And she worked, or she interned in the music industry in LA. And I think that's how this whole connection came about with Suge and her friend and whatever. But anyway, she said that on her first night of employment, Diddy said to her, he said, if anything happens with Suge, I'd have to kill you, or something along those lines. And the defense kind of clarified, he didn't just take her into Central Park. I guess they had parked at Tavern on the Green. They didn't eat there, but Central Park seems to be a place where Diddy goes frequently for walks, and they even were there earlier that day. So they were trying to sort of mitigate this, dark, elusive threat that she spoke about. She testified that, I thought this was interesting. She testified that during a press event, at an MTV press event, and she didn't say the date, but at the time, this music manager, Chris Lighty, he managed 50 Cent and Diddy. And she said that Diddy had a problem with 50 Cent, and they were in the elevator, and this was not 50 Cent. It was Chris Lighty, Capricorn, Diddy, and Diddy said to Chris Lighty, he said, I don't like the back and forth, meaning with 50 Cent. He said, I don't like the back and forth. I like guns. Oh, okay. So that was a moment. And I think I was just more interested in that because 50 Cent trolls Diddy nonstop. And I was like, okay, so there is some beef on Diddy's end, even though he's denied it in the past. Now, Capricorn talked about how in 2004, her first year of employment, she was accused of stealing some jewelry that was loaned to Diddy by Jacob the jeweler. She was traveling when this happened, and she tells Diddy and security, it's missing. And they say, okay, go back to New York. We will handle this. And she said, you better search everyone, call them, search them, whatever, whoever was around this jewelry. Well, then she talks about something very traumatic that happened to her, where she was picked up by one of Diddy's security guards, Uncle Paulie, and she was taken to a building, this like very abandoned building. And it was in Manhattan. And it actually, I believe it turned out to be one of their offices later on. But at the time, it was dilapidated. He took her up to the 6th floor. She talked about how the door locked on the outside. So she was locked in. And there was this table and just like 2 chairs. And she described a man sitting there that was 5 times her size, chain smoking. She said that he told her if she didn't pass the polygraph test, she was going to be thrown into the East River. The East River in Manhattan, I mean, not that it matters, but it's so gross. It is disgusting, and it's scary. So she said that she was there. I mean, she went home at the end of the day, but she had to be there taking this polygraph test 5 days in a row, all day. So, she didn't pass at first, or it was inconclusive because she was so nervous. And they said to her, you better pass this or you're going to be thrown into the East River. And the defense kind of, when they got up there, they were just like, okay, you told Diddy and his team that everybody should be searched and everybody should be investigated. So just want to point that out. So she also, she talked about how she worked from 7 a.m. to 4 a.m. some days and she was exhausted, and she developed alopecia from the stress of her grueling schedule. She also said that she was only making $65,000, and that at one point she went to HR about this, and they calculated some overtime for her, which totaled up to $80,000. And I guess they had this in a sheet of paper or something for Diddy. They handed it to him, HR, and Capricorn Clark said she watched him rip it up and she never got that money. She also talked about cleaning up after freak offs. She said that she would book hotels in 2004 at this time for Diddy and Kim Porter a lot. So many of us were wondering, okay, so is Kim Porter, or was she doing these FOs? Because she testified, Capricorn Clark, that she had the baby oil in the room, the candles that she would set things up with, and she would clean up. She said baby oil off the wall, off of the floors. She said there'd be handprints on the walls with baby oil. She talked about the Louis Vuitton med bag that we heard so much about multiple times, just more corroboration. So there was another incident, and this was the first time that she left the company, and she left and she got fired. And there is a lot of back and forth about this. It was slightly confusing, but she testified that he asked her to get I don't know if I can say it on YouTube. Yes, that cocaine for somebody, and she said no. And then she testified about getting prescription drugs for him. And then she testified about an occurrence. And sorry, I'm going back to where she talked about how she left the company at one point. And this was after an incident in Miami where she said that the chef, she said something like, "I hate it here," in the kitchen. And the chef told Diddy, and he physically shoved her shoulders. She said he used about 70% of his force, shoved her out of his house, and is like, "Get the F out, get the F out." That's around 2006. And then she came back in 2007 as a brand manager for Sean John. They talked about why she returned. The defense was like, "So you were treated like this, but you returned." And she kept saying, "It's complicated." And she cried a lot on the stand. I felt for her. It was very emotional. Then she talked about when she was working with Cassie, the whole Kid Cudi thing. She was the one that got Cassie to get a burner phone to talk to Kid Cudi, because she's like, "Listen, Cassie, he pays for everything. He pays for our phones, and he's going to see this. So don't text me about Kid Cudi." Capricorn Clark said that he paid for her apartment, her car, her phone. He paid for everything in her life. So she testified that when Diddy found out that he came to her apartment, she said between 5:30 and 6 a.m., he knocked. He was pounding on her door, not knocking, but she looked through a peephole and she saw him with a gun. She said she felt like she had no choice but to let him in. And he basically said to her, "Get up, get dressed. We're going to go kill this guy." And he used another word. And he was talking about Kid Cudi. She said she was terrified. When the defense got up to cross-examine her, they were kind of just like, "So, who let him in?" And she talked about how a security guard let him in. The security guard has been fired. And she said she doesn't know his name, but they were kind of just trying to say, "Well, how do you get in? He didn't break into your house," whatever. But she talked about how they got to the car. She drove to Kid Cudi's house, and that's where she called Cassie on the burner phone, and Kid Cudi was on speaker. And she said that she told them, "Diddy's in your house and he has a gun." And she said that Kid Cudi said, "What? He's in my house?" And then, according to Capricorn Clark, Diddy came out and she hung up the phone, and she changed the name in the phone to her friend Stormy. And he's like, who are you on the phone with?" And she's like, "My friend." And he grabbed it. He called it back. He found it was Cassie, and he was even angrier than he was before. This is her testimony. And then she said at that point, they all get back in the car and they see Kid Cudi's Porsche coming up. And we had never heard this before, but according to her, he pulls up and then he speeds away and they chase him up a hill. And then eventually they lose him. But then she testified that Diddy threatened she and Cassie and said, look, it was later that night. If you guys don't get him to not tell the police, he said, I will kill you both. So they tried to convince him, I guess, not to tell the police. Now, we have not heard yet from anyone from the LAPD just yet. But she also talked about Capricorn Clark, how she got a call later that summer, the summer of 2012. And again, if you recall, this whole incident happened in 2011, in December of 2011. She was fired in March of 2012. And this was because she said because of a vacation that she told Harv Pierre about. And, they said, oh, yeah, you didn't tell us you were going on vacation. And she kind of knew, like, they were done with her. They wanted her gone after this, according to her. But anyway, that summer, she said she got a call from someone working arson in LAPD. And she said she hung up on them. She's like, I didn't want anything to do with any of this anymore. But she also testified that she didn't know anything about an arson, aka the Molotov cocktail. Now let's go back to the driveway when she made this call to Cassie and Kid Cudi. During the cross-examination, there was a really big moment because Mark Agnifilo said, so when you called Cassie on the burner, you weren't on a three-way call with Lauren London, were you? And she's like, what? No, absolutely not. And he's like, are you sure? And she's like, yes, I'm sure. And for many of us, we're very shocked because we've heard this story multiple times about the break-in, but we haven't heard Lauren London's name dropped in any of this. Well, then she says, Capricorn Clark says, well, I called her first before I called Cassie and Kid Cudi. And then the defense was like, well, wait, your whole thing was you were so worried, because she said this, I was so worried that Kid Cudi was in the house that I didn't know what Diddy would do. So they were like, so you called Lauren London first. And she's like, yeah, well, just, to cover my own butt, for her to say where I was because I was scared. And then she's like, out of the blue, she goes, well, I guess Lauren could have been on the phone when I called Cassie. There's the possibility, which was much different than anything that we had heard up until then because she was so adamant about her not being on the call. So that was interesting. There was also another event she mentioned, just I think that corroborates the grooming of Cassie. She actually said Lauren London and Capricorn, they were in the kitchen with Diddy. And he said, you know why you guys don't have a man? And they're like, why? And then he called Cassie in and he's like, walk over here, walk over there, pick that up and give it to me. And now leave. And she did. And they're like, and he said, because you won't do that. And they're like, yeah, you damn right we won't. So yeah, we heard Lauren London's names twice today. So she leaves in 2012 and then she returns again in 2016. And this is Capricorn Clark. But what we heard a lot from the defense, and just to go back to the government, again, the control with Cassie, she witnessed the control, she witnessed just how abusive he was. I guess she witnessed him kick Cassie after the Kid Cudi incident. And when she told us that, I felt like it was very emotional. She just talked about how he kept kicking her and kicking her and kicking her. And he said to Capricorn, like, if you jump in, you're going to get effed up too. So Capricorn said that she left and she ended up calling Cassie's mother. And she just said, I'm over my head. I can't do anything about this, but he is beating the crap out of your daughter and you can do something about it. And so Cassie's mom said, okay, basically in 2016, she returns to focus on Cassie. And the defense elicited testimony from Capricorn saying that she didn't think Cassie was very talented. And then she kind of clarifies, well, Whitney Houston is talented. And she kind of said that Cassie, she changed a lot. She had a sweet demeanor when she was a model. And then, she kind of became a little bit different as Sean Combs' girlfriend. And she testified that Cassie, like I said, a lot of bad boy artists got a lot less attention than Cassie, or a lot less resources than Cassie did. She testified that because Cassie told Diddy to hire Capricorn Clark back, that's why he did it. And she had been kind of emailing him and trying to get back into his good graces, during that time. And she cried on the stand saying that it hurt her during cross-examination that Diddy only hired her back because Cassie told him to. So then the defense elicited a very random meeting that they got her to talk about that they had with her. And I mean, like, Mark Agnifilo and Tenny Garagos had a meeting with Capricorn Clark in April of 2024. When I was writing that down, I was like, did I say that right? That's crazy. They met with her in April of 2024, and they talked about, I guess, her coming back to work as chief of staff, or she brought it up. And they're like, yeah, just so you know, he's under criminal investigation. That probably wouldn't work. And the defense said, do you remember saying that if I was still here, this wouldn't have happened? And she's like, no, I don't remember. They also said that her attorney was present, Brian Friedman, which many of you will know that he currently represents Justin Baldoni. Yeah, and then the defense just got testimony out of Capricorn saying that her relationship with Diddy was complicated. She felt like his protector a lot of the times. And yeah, she cried a lot. And he was very stoic. He didn't seem to move. He didn't seem to he passed some notes to Mark Agnifilo during this time, during his cross. They did try to poke some holes. They said, oh, you said Lauren London was here, but are you sure you didn't tell the government it was Lorianne Gibson? She's a choreographer. And Capricorn's like, nope, that must have been a mistake. A lot of the time they've been doing this. They've been handing the transcripts of the government interviews that the witnesses have done. And a lot of the testimony is different, and they're trying to call them out on it. They also pointed out that, she seemed to be business as usual, sending emails and whatnot a week or two after the kidnapping and Kid Cudi. I'd say overall, I mean, the jury, I just want to point out, they've been super stoic. It's been really hard to read them a lot of the time. Last week, it was a lot. And I did see some of them kind of falling asleep in the middle row when the HSI employee was testifying, and also Dr. Don Hughes. A lot of that testimony can be a little bit mundane. Today, though, during Capricorn Clark's testimony about the kidnapping and the Kid Cudi thing, they were writing things down. They were like paying really close attention. I was wow. Like I just felt like they were engaged, and I haven't seen them super engaged, just kind of, again, stoic. I think that's pretty much it for day 10. What we're going to see this week, we're going to hear from an LAPD officer. We're also going to hear from someone from the LA Fire Department. I believe this is going to be in connection to Kid Cudi. And then we're also going to hear from a former assistant going by a pseudonym named Mia, because she is also an SA victim or survivor of Sean Combs, allegedly. So I believe we're going to hear from her tomorrow or on the 29th. So stay tuned for that. But again, this is a very long update. I didn't mean for it to be this long. I was just trying to go through things so you would get caught up. Moving forward, they'll be very short, 10 to 20 minutes. And I promise, just really, really easy. Thanks for listening, guys. I will be back with another daily Diddy Digest tomorrow.